talk to your friends, talk to
Mhm.
your family. Let's be more transparent about what
Yeah.
our experiences are. I think when we share information, we learn from each other.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unison Community Podcast. Today we have Dr. Navya Mysore here with us. Dr. Mysore is a primary care physician, women's health leader, mother, and dog mom. Born and raised in Montreal, Canada, she completed medical school and family medicine residency at McGill University, where she also completed a fellowship in maternal fetal medicine. Navya is the medical director for women's health at NERCS from 30 Madison, leading efforts to transform healthcare by making it more accessible and affordable. Prior to that, Navya was the national program medical director for sexual and reproductive health at One Medical. And today, since we're so excited to have her here with us, we're going to do something a little bit different than we've done in other episodes and actually ask Navya to share with us what she would tell her younger self with regard to a variety of different topics in women's health. And as you know, the reason we started Unison was for us to learn basic things about our bodies and health that shouldn't really be secrets. And so today I want to take the opportunity while we have Navya here to ask her what advice she would give her younger self, knowing what she knows now, even though she is still very young. And and we will be going through some topics such as fertility, labor, as many topics as we can get through today, just so we can kind of pick her brain, both from kind of the patient perspective as well as the physician perspective. So thank you, Navya, for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for that intro. Yeah, it's interesting. Having gone through medical school and then residency and practicing for a number of years before I started to live through some of these life phases myself,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that sort of my counseling and the way that I would sort of structure how I talk to patients would be very much black and white. And then having experienced it myself, realizing that there are so many shades of gray and there's a lot of things you think the way things are going to happen and then they don't end up happening the way you are thinking that they're going to happen, and um, that the fact that like you don't really have control over some of these things.
Right.
And so I think that definitely was like a resonating thing for me coming on the other end of it, especially after each of these life phases. I would say that like the way I thought about it personally and the way that I also counseled my patients have changed a lot since the beginning.
That's great to hear. And I will say, we've come across your content online. We've sort of been chatting back and forth a little in the comments and DMs. And so we have really appreciated what you've shared so far. So thank you again for being here today. And I will just jump right in.
Yeah.
So, fertility, you have 2 kids and you are currently pregnant. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Just wanted to ask you, what would you tell the version of yourself that was trying to conceive? I think there's a lot more conversation about fertility nowadays and kind of trying to conceive and some of the challenges that people may encounter. And so, yes, just curious to hear, and also the difference between your first time being pregnant and your third time being pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. The biggest thing I'm going to say is that fertility journeys are unpredictable. I think you go through a lot of your teenager years and 20s being like, I don't want to get pregnant, and
Mhm.
like learning how to not get pregnant. And then all of a sudden it creeps up on you and you're like, oh, we are family planning now and I do want to get pregnant. And how is this going to work? And then you're just, trying to figure out and sort of, and then I've seen it time and time again, not just with myself, but with patients as well, like scrambling to try to figure out like, how do I even do this? Um, I will say like fertility, like I said, is unpredictable. In my scenario, I was able to get pregnant relatively easily with my first two boys. And then now with this third, I actually experienced secondary infertility, which is, I think, something that obviously people know about, but I don't feel like we talk about as much. That totally caught me off guard. I was not expecting that I would have a hard time conceiving my third time around, seeing that I had conceived relatively easily for the first two.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a circuitous journey with that, with figuring out that I had endometriosis and then having to go down that pathway. I did some cycles of IVF. I was also older. My ovarian reserve had reduced. And so there's a lot of things to sort of come to terms with also from a personal perspective. And it's also, I think it's challenging because it's not just your health, but I think also the way that we have talked about this in the past in our society has been that if you're not able to get pregnant, then it's something to be considered a failure. And that is something that I think we really need to change the language around and to understand, why our bodies are doing a certain thing. And sometimes there's no explanation for it.
Right.
And also know what your options are, but by no way is it a failure. And I think that's important to me as having experienced it myself, having even though I know that, I still felt those feelings
Right.
because it's so ingrained in how we think in our society, because it's the way that we've sort of been thinking about things for years. And I do think the messaging is changing, which is great. And I'm hoping, for our next generation, the generation to come, that it won't be something that they actually like feel themselves. They
Right.
like very well will know this is nothing to do with me. This is not, a failure in any way. I would say, I think planning and timing is great and should be part of the conversation with your partner, but that it's not always a guarantee
Mm.
that things are going to work out just because you've been planning with a specific timeline. A lot of patients also come to me having a particular plan of how they want to have their family, and are really sort of rigid with that plan. And then as they experience it and realize where there's challenges, they have to come to terms that that plan is no longer going to happen. In general, having a plan is a good idea, but knowing that it can change.
Mm-hmm.
And then asking for support early, right? I think there's this fear of one saying anything to anybody, saying anything to either your girlfriends or your family or whatever your support system is, saying that we are trying and it has been really difficult. It can feel really isolating in that
Right.
time when you're just cycle after cycle trying and doing different things, but you haven't quite gone yet to do fertility procedures or to investigate. But you're still sort of using the ovulation strips and temperature, and then you're waiting the 2 weeks. It can really play with your mind a lot. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would always tell people just, reach out for support when you need it. And I think that it's more common than you think, right? You
Right.
always think like, okay, like I'm the only one experiencing this, but there are so many people experiencing something similar.
Right. No, totally. And I really like what you said about sort of including your support system. I wanted to ask, what is the main reason you think fertility seems very daunting? Because you mentioned a few things. There's planning involved. There's sort of these societal norms. Do you think that it's the the more kind of outright conversation that we're having about the challenges that makes it seem more daunting? Is it the presence of social media, or is it just kind of all the factors that you listed before?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I would say, social media for sure plays a part in it. I think social media can be very, very helpful when you are looking at the right sources to understand what fertility options are out there. There's some really good healthcare providers out there doing amazing content in the fertility space. And they have with evidence-based information, digestible for individuals. And I would highly recommend that anyone who is looking to understand more to go and follow those individuals. But I do think the comparison part is also there too, right? So like a lot of people will sort of post or like, oh, like this was my experience and like this is my experience. And then one thing that I have learned over the years of this now, my third pregnancy, is that, yeah, someone may have an easy fertility journey, but
Mm-hmm.
then their pregnancy or postpartum might be really challenging, right? So
Right.
it's like, it's not the end of the journey, right? It's not saying like,
Right.
oh, this person got pregnant really easily. Then like, oh, they're so lucky. I'm like, yes, it's great. It's great for them, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to have their own set of challenges down the road in something different, right?
Right.
But still related. And so listening to women over the years sort of talk about their experiences, whether it be labor and delivery, whether it be C-section versus vaginal delivery, pregnancy, postpartum, every single person has had their own set of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is helpful to remember when you're sort of seeing only the glowy, happy part on, on social media. And then the other part I would say too is I think it can feel a little daunting because we have more options now, which
Mm.
is great. And technology has come a long way. Science has come a long way, versus in like my grandmother's generation, and frankly, even in my parents' generation, fertility options didn't really exist. And in many cultures, depending on what kind of background you're coming from socioeconomically, it was really like if you wouldn't get pregnant, you would be like, oh, well, it's not in the cards for us. And then
Right.
it would sort of be the chapter would be closed. Um, Versus now, that's not really the case, right? Like you could go and get an evaluation, and then there's like five different ways to approach what's
True.
going on. And I think that can feel really daunting. It's also really great too that we have all those options. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Definitely. And I love that positive framing of it because I think sometimes we kind of forget that. I do want to move on to labor slash pregnancy, being pregnant and then preparing for labor. Like you mentioned, there's decisions about fertility. There's also decisions for, labor. So curious what you would tell yourself about preparing for labor, the process of being pregnant.
Totally. So I will share, and I actually co-wrote an article. This is, I think, probably 2020 or late 2019, about my pregnancy experience with my first. And I ended up having perinatal depression during my first pregnancy. A part of it, I think, was a few different factors. I think hormones had a big thing, had a lot to play with it. I also do think, even though I am in women's health and I'm equipped with all this information, I was totally shocked by all the changes that were happening in my body. I felt horrible. I had a really terrible first trimester. Many sort of friends in our group were not having kids yet. And so I felt a little bit more isolated.
Mhm.
I felt like I could not reach out to anybody. I didn't really know sort of what my resources was, even though I like work in this field, right?
Right.
So I think it really is not an easy phase. And I feel like for many years we've portrayed women as being this glowy, like, oh, I'm so had joyful, like, so like the joy of being pregnant. And
Mhm.
yes, there's certainly some joys of being pregnant that are unique and special and awesome, but then there's a lot of pregnancy that's really uncomfortable and not easy, and your body changes and shifts and your identity shifts and you lose yourself in that process. And I found it personally really challenging my first pregnancy, and then because of that I had postpartum anxiety with my son, and it was sort of all sort of intercombined, and it was a combination of medication, therapy, which was amazing and would highly advocate literally anybody doing therapy. And then the third thing was I actually joined this mom postpartum support group that essentially met for a series of number of weeks, and we talked about particular topics. And so
Right.
all the way from your birth story, to your identity as a woman, or your identity in your career, and I all of that really just helped me found my grounding. And I was so much more proactive with my second pregnancy,
Mhm.
with Zane, my second, my my son, I would say with him, I like preemptively did therapy almost preventatively prior
Okay.
to labor and also during the pregnancy. I had pre-booked some therapy sessions like a week postpartum to talk about the whole experience and how I felt. I had a very different sort of plan going into my labor, and we can talk about labor in a second. But I I did many things to really help myself sort of not be in a similar situation. And I think to some degree, I didn't feel as helpless. I felt like
Right.
I knew, and it was again your second time around, so you know a little bit more, you know
Right.
what to expect. But I do think like sometimes doing some of that prep beforehand can be really helpful.
Definitely. And it's super interesting to hear, you practice in this field and still you had this sense
Yep.
of not really being certain of what's happening or what your
Yep.
resources are. So I think, again, that just emphasizes you're not alone. We did have a really
Yep.
great perinatal psychiatrist come on with us a while ago, Dr. Kaylee Woody. She was great. So if anyone wants to hear more specifics on that topic, you can go back to that episode. But just also curious, you've been pregnant multiple times and your first pregnancy was really difficult. And we've seen this in a lot of women. I mean, Serena Williams got pregnant again. That's like kind of the famous case, I would say. Just curious, what was it that made you want to do this again and kind of work through it, knowing how difficult and challenging it would be?
Yeah, I certainly will say I paused for a second. I also had a very challenging delivery for my first, um, where I did not feel like I was able to advocate for myself as much as I would have liked during the process. And we can talk, a little bit about birth plans, but to answer the question, um, I had to process all of that. And I think that was really important for me. Like once I started to see a therapist, I learned the idea that I had to grieve essentially what I thought my experience would be
Mm,
versus what my reality of my experience was. And then also be able to sort of take out what didn't go well and what potentially I could change and do different for the future, but also really hold on to like the amazing positive nuggets that were there. and
right.
and frankly, I will say there is probably something anthropologically in our brains to allow us to forget some of it because it does blur with with time. And I think also just seeing your baby, for me, I really wanted Amar, my oldest, to have a sibling. It was really
Right.
important for me. And so that was a huge driving factor. But I do think, a lot of it was me processing like, okay, like how can I go through this experience again? Um, and changing the tune to it where I felt like I was more in the driver's seat as opposed to feeling a little bit sort of helpless. Um,
Yeah.
and then I caveat driver's seat but also saying like go with the flow. So I think, my first pregnancy, I certainly had a birth plan. I knew it wouldn't potentially go as planned. I didn't realize that I would essentially be throwing my birth plan out the window, which is what ended up happening. And so I think it was very helpful for me to realize, okay, I can have certain thoughts and ideas of what my birth plan is, but let me maybe have a few iterations of my birth plan. So not one singular, but A, B, and C. So like A scenario, okay, B scenario potentially, C scenario
Mhm.
potentially. And also just who knows, maybe I'm just going to have to like let this all go and figure it out as it happens. And that also was the case for my second too. So, but I was prepared for that, and there were key things that I really wanted, and the list was short, and I that happened, and I was grateful for that. And I also really communicated to my partner when I needed the support that I needed. He was amazing with the first pregnancy too, but was also the new experience for him
Right.
and didn't really know what was happening in the room. And versus the second time around, he felt much more equipped to sort of be my voice. And so would highly advocate, like when thinking about a birth plan, like, yes, it's great to have one and it's good to have an idea, but also having some flexibility and knowing that it's okay that, and if things go a little haywire, what is your backup plan? Like, who's going to speak for you? Who
Mm-hmm.
can, how can you communicate with your partner? How can you communicate with your OB, or your midwife, and figuring out what that is.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think the concept of having someone advocate for you or someone there to speak for you when you feel pretty vulnerable is something that's come up with a lot of people we've spoken to, and honestly, nothing that I've ever thought of. So it's affirming to hear that that's a good strategy when you're in these more vulnerable situations. You did mention some challenges also postpartum. I think conversations around postpartum depression have been more common, but what would you tell yourself in terms of taking care of yourself, whether you have postpartum depression or not? And then again, if there's any support maybe you would have asked for in those times or that you did ask for.
Oh, I still remember creating this like long to-do list of things I wanted to get done and or accomplish when I was postpartum with my first. And then I was postpartum with my first, and I was like, oh, I am struggling to shower or to even have a sip of coffee. Like,
Yeah.
and that really was hard. It was hard for me to adjust to. And I don't think I had anticipated that.
Right.
Um, I also, again, didn't have a lot of, as much as I had heard some of that. You always sort of think your experience is going to be different, and then you live through it, and you're like, oh no, yeah, I can essentially get three things done today. And so I ended up, it took me a while in my first, but certainly with my second, I had much more realistic expectations. And what I would do is I think a lot of women feel this, is especially women who are used to getting a lot done or being very career driven, that sort of like type A, perfectionistic behavior of like, this is how I like all the things I want to get done, or these are my goals, etc. Um, I think a lot of women struggle with this idea of like not being able to do as much. And
Mm.
so I um, I created, at least for myself, this way of like three or four things that I'm going to get done today, of which one of those was shower.
Yeah.
So it's like, basic things, but there is a sense of accomplishment when you've actually been like, okay, I actually did everything that I was supposed to do today. Like,
Right.
great, amazing. And it reinforces that sort of like the positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was really helpful for me. I would say reaching out for support as much as possible, making sure you have your support system. It really does take a village, and giving them very specific tasks, right? Like, I think I also hesitated in my first pregnancy to be sort of specific with my family members and friends. But with my second, I would say, like, hey, can you go put that load of laundry in for me? Or
Oh yeah.
like, hey, I really need to just get out of the house. Do you mind holding on to the baby? And I'm going to leave. I'll be back in like, a half hour kind of thing. And I would have never done that with my first pregnancy, but I felt like I had to do everything myself. And
Mm.
with my second, I was like, no, this is what my network is here for. And frankly, I thrived much better with it.
Mm.
And my support system felt better too, because they felt more involved. And, generally speaking too, I think from the perspective of the baby, like, he got to experience just being nurtured by different people. It was a very different experience my second time around. And I would definitely say, have your support system, give them specific tasks. Have other people watch your mood. I think that's also helpful too, because you can get so sort of stuck in it that you might not even notice that you're exhibiting signs of depression, anxiety, or postpartum psychosis, which is also something that people don't really talk about, but does happen. And I think that's really, really important for people to be mindful of that. And, I've had a history of that. So I have told my girlfriends already for this time too. I'm like, hey guys, there's a lot going on. It's the third time around. Can you guys just like watch out? And if I'm like not reaching out, or if I'm isolating myself, like, please help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can go a long way.
Definitely. And it is interesting what you mentioned after your first pregnancy, just the pressure that women might put on themselves to have to do everything. And so I really am hoping that we start having these conversations about how important your village is. Just keep talking about these sorts of phases of life and just normalizing that, I had to make a to-do list to take a shower today, and that's fine. Just because you
Yeah.
could do all these things however long ago, it's like, okay, now things are different. And you just, from what I'm hearing, I've never experienced, but it's kind of accepting this new phase of life and just
Yes.
what it means to
Yes.
be productive. Because also, by the way, you're doing these things, but you're also trying to raise a baby and take care of a baby. And
Yeah.
so there's just a
And
lot going
also
on.
like grew the baby and birthed the baby,
Right.
and healing it takes much longer than we think.
Mm,
They say the postpartum period is 6 months. It's definitely longer than 6 months. Our bodies take a
right.
lot more time, and our minds too, as well, right? Um, I do think that from the perspective of being productive, I had an emergency C-section with my first pregnancy. And I was essentially couldn't really move for a little bit.
Mhm.
But despite that, I would somehow get up, do those loads of laundry, fold everything, clean the bottles, clean the pump parts, do what I need to do, because I just had this need to be productive.
Right.
Versus my second pregnancy, I was like, that stuff can wait. And you just like we weren't quite sure if we were going to have a third at that point, and so I was like, this may be my last, and so
Right.
I'm just going to savor the moment and sit here, and all these other things can wait, and or other people can do them for you.
Totally. Totally. I now want to move away from pregnancy and labor to perimenopause, which for me, as someone who doesn't work in medicine, this is a new concept to me. So curious, is there even a way to prepare for perimenopause? And if so, what would you tell yourself in preparation? What can you anticipate, I suppose?
So I have not experienced it myself yet.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm probably going to experience it pretty soon, and might be squashed up against my postpartum period this time
Mhm.
around. But a lot of the symptoms, and I actually remember my mom going through a lot of this as a teenager, seeing my mom, and how much she struggled with perimenopause and menopause symptoms. Her hot flashes were so intense. And I just remember her like literally being soaked head to toe.
Uh,
And it is interesting. Like, she wouldn't really talk about it much, and I think she to some degree, struggled a little bit in silence, which was a lot of that generation,
right.
where you didn't really know who to go to, and it's only more so in the tail end of her sort of menopause experience where she had a really great primary care doctor, and she would talk about some of these things, and she got some help for the symptoms that she was having. But I do think a big part of it is learning about it, right? Is educating yourself. All of this,
Mm,
right? Fertility, pregnancy, postpartum. Some of it you don't. It's like you can learn about it, but you don't actually know it until you've been through it.
right.
Um, So it's like, some people say like, when am I going to be ready to have a kid? I'm like, I don't think you're ever really ready to have a kid until you have a kid. So similar, I think all of these life phases are a little bit like that, right? But I do think education is really helpful. And so knowing, again, similarly, where to go for that information, right? Where can you find evidence-based information? There's so much misinformation out there. There are
Mm-hmm.
also so many new products that are made out of God knows what, like not evidence-based products, and are slated to say that they're going to help balance out your hormones and make your experience of perimenopause a lot smoother, and it really like targets they're sort of targeting that insecurity or that feeling of like the unknown for a lot of women, where they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe this is something that will actually help me. And I do think part of it is this is physiological, right? This is going to happen in your body. We all are going to experience this in different ways. Everyone's experience is different.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some patients who literally will live through perimenopause for like a much longer period of time than their actual menopause experience, which is not
Mm-hmm.
uncommon. But generally speaking, we say like 5 to 7 years before you hit menopause. So average age of menopause is 50, so you're thinking like around like 45, sometimes even
Okay.
earlier. And I've had women come to me even in their late 30s, starting to experience slight changes to their body where it's not, I mean, is it perimenopause, is it just hormonal shifts that are happening with age? It's probably a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a normal sort of progression that happens to our bodies, right? And so similarly, like when I had infertility issues, I was in my late 30s, and I'm 40 right now. And so it was 100% directly related to age.
Mm-hmm.
And, everyone's trajectory is different. I've also had patients at 40 where their ovarian reserve is great. And so I think part part of it is educating yourself and understanding what your picture is, and having a really strong healthcare provider to like sort of lean on and have a support who can provide you with that information and guide you uh, where you need to go. Maybe you do need support during your perimenopause period, and that could be in the form of birth control. Many women assume like, oh, I'm not going to get pregnant because I'm in perimenopause. I'm like, you can still get pregnant during that
Right.
time. And so, birth control can be really helpful in one, helping some of those symptoms, but then also preventing pregnancy. But then knowing when you want to sort of, you're going into menopause, how to recognize some of those symptoms, and then how to adjust your lifestyle based on it as well.
Definitely. That's super interesting. And I think this education component is really important. How does someone know? I guess, like, there's this term normal, which
Mhm.
nothing is the same for everyone, but curious, how do you know if what you're experiencing in perimenopause or menopause is actually normal? Should someone be questioning things at any point if they're uncomfortable? Or how do you know when to seek help? How do you know this is just something I'm going through? It'll be
Yeah.
over at some point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think this is actually pertinent for all life phases. But I will say with perimenopause, probably one of the most important things that you can do, and I also think this is for other life phases too, but is track your cycle. Track your cycle, but not just your period. Track other symptoms around your period. So
Got it.
anything that you're experiencing, right? Whether that be sleep disruption, mood changes, brain fog, weight issues, um, hot flashes during the day, night sweats, any of those symptoms, vaginal dryness, those are all important to have in context of your cycle. Some of those things might just be happening all throughout your cycle, and women tend to actually notice that more and more as they're getting deeper into perimenopause. But at the beginning, it might actually look cyclical. And so I would always recommend people to just monitor your symptoms, know what the pattern is. If you're re-seeing this every single time during your cycle, then there might be a correlation related to it. aside from that too, if you're having a new symptom that you haven't experienced before and it is not going away after a short period of time, and generally I would say a short period of time is a couple of weeks,
Hmm.
it's probably worth checking in with your healthcare provider and being like, hey, like I am experiencing this. These are the characteristics of what I'm experiencing. Go in and have that conversation and then see, what is needed in terms of investigations. It may not be necessarily related to um, perimenopause, but it could be something else, right? Like it
Right.
could be related to your thyroid. It could be related to iron deficiency anemia. It could be related to something else that's going on in your body that needs investigation as well.
Super interesting. And yeah, I think it's also just remembering you know your body best. And so if something feels off, and like you said, you're tracking these patterns, good idea to go get it checked out. And something else that has come up through kind of all these phases, I guess we've spoken about so far, is mental health. And I think there's been a lot more discussion of mental health online, as of late. What would you tell your younger self about maintaining mental health throughout the years? And also just thinking about for parents, when is it that you should really start thinking about mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say probably the biggest thing I've learned is to be proactive about your mental health and not reactive to your mental
Mm,
health. Um, I uh, I think it is, as much as we emphasize on taking care of our physical bodies, I think we need to emphasize taking care of our non-physical bodies or our mental health. Um, I it's easy to forget. And I
mhm.
think, especially as a kid, and then also into your teens and 20s, I think it's something that we don't necessarily focus on. I also think in your teenage years and in your 20s, you don't really take care of your body that well. Now, some of that is changing. I'm feeling the messaging around that changing. I'm seeing a
Mhm.
lot of younger individuals really focusing on like sleep, nutrition, exercise, and that is great to see.
Yeah,
That certainly was not my experience as a teenager.
not mine either.
And so I think like again, education around it is really important. I will say from the perspective of parenting, it I actually think as soon as they are a little bit more aware of the world, which generally I would say is around like 5, 6, you can start to sort of realize like, okay, like they're starting to have their own anxieties, their own stressors. It may manifest in different ways, but being there and supporting your kid and talking to them, explaining what you are feeling, I think makes a huge difference. We underestimate, I think, how much our children um, look to us as examples. And so it's sometimes not even necessarily how you are communicating with your child, but it's actually how you are treating yourself. And
Mhm.
so your child will see you meditating, will see you exercising, will see you making a smoothie for yourself, will see you in the kitchen cooking, and that is huge for the kid, right? To see that like my mom or dad or parent is taking the time to take care of themselves, and I think
Right.
that is really really big for a kid. I'm by no means an expert in with that, and I think there are people, especially at social media. I think there are some people who do a really great job, but I would say, from my experience, at least now with my two boys, that's really what I am seeing.
Mhm.
Is that when I emulate or when I take good care of myself, I see my
Right.
kids reflecting that too.
That's really cool and something I've never thought about, but it does make a lot of sense in hindsight. I think a lot of the behaviors that I exhibit in my lifestyle definitely reflect those of my parents. Whether or not I meant for that is a different question, but so that makes a lot of sense. I am also curious. So you mentioned there's some people on social media who are really, strong and well placed to talk about this. Curious if there's any other resources that you learned about in your lifetime that are either free or public or easily accessible to people maybe struggling a bit with their mental health?
Oh, yeah, there's tons of resources out there, whether it's in relation to sleep, nutrition, mental health. Even if you're thinking about like contraception and like other resources out there, I can give you a pretty long list. Also, individuals who I think have like really good evidence-based content on social media.
I'd love to share that with people. And then just shifting to or speaking more about women and mothers specifically, like we mentioned, there's this pressure to do a lot, whether you are managing a household and raising a kid or working and raising a kid, the expectation to kind of balance everything in life. What is something that's kind of helped you manage your mental health around, raising kids and working? And you also have a lot of sort of extracurricular career things as well going on, as we know through your social media, et cetera. So yeah, how do you balance it all, and what helps you kind of maintain your mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question, and took me a while to figure out. I would say I think boundaries are key, and I think this idea that you bounce back, whether that's motivationally, whether that's career oriented, whether that's body related. I would say like we need to just take that word out and throw it out. You don't bounce back. You recreate a new reality for yourself,
Right.
and a reality that is realistic. And I think for me, there's always this phrase that I also don't love, like women can have it all, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I I I do think women can have it all. I just don't think you can have it every single day.
Yeah.
Like, there's no possible way that I could be the most amazing, engaged, mindful mom doing all these activities with my boys and also have a kick-ass day at work,
Mm.
getting deliverables done and or seeing patients and working on extra side projects and taking care of the house and making sure that we are all well nourished and doing what we need to do, making those doctor's visits, getting that laundry done, and taking care of myself. It's impossible. Just
Mhm.
even me listing it out, I'm exhausted
Yeah.
by hearing it. Like, it's too much, and it's the pressure is unbelievable.
Hmm.
And so what I at least for me, what worked for me, therapy was very helpful. I have certain non-negotiables that I will set for myself every day. And so definitely a non-negotiable is one kind of self-care thing per day, whether that be a workout. I may not get a workout in every single day, whether that be I'm going to pay extra attention to the food that I'm eating today and I'm not just going to eat on the go, whether that be I need to get to bed early today and clock in and I need my 9 hours today, whether,
Hmm.
9 hours, 8 hours, whatever it may be. Um, I I think that is really helpful for me to sort of balance it out without having to do all of it every single day. I also think that with all of those things in my life, my different buckets of family, home, work, identity, I try to feed a few of them per day. And
Hmm.
so typically the night before, I'll make a to-do list of like 3 to 5 things I want to accomplish that day. And I try to make sure that they're not all from the same bucket and that they're from various different buckets of my life. And so I feel generally relatively accomplished, like I've hit the things that I needed to hit for that day. But there are certainly going to be days where that's just not possible. Like if I am working on something that is really intense with work, yeah, I will have to ask my partner, like, hey, I essentially cannot be with the boys for like the next like 24 to 48 hours.
Hmm.
Can you really help me here? And he will. We figure it out. And I think
Yeah.
that's where the partnership is really important. And it might not be necessarily with your partner, it may be with other family members or friends too, right? Like again, I think it really does take a village, even past the postpartum period,
Yeah.
as you are a mom in this world, and being okay with that, right? Like
Mhm.
it's impossible that we would be able to do all of it every single day.
Definitely. And so, again, just echoing the village is really important. And I
Yeah.
think, are you finding, from a physician perspective that I think, there's concerns since COVID, people are maybe becoming less social or going out less, maybe less connected with people. We also are in this weird technological transition phase. And so there's a lot of staying at home. Are you finding that people are mothers, young mothers, or whoever, are they, able to find their communities pretty well and get the support they need, and the resources they need?
Um, yes and no. I don't think it's quite as readily apparent as to where to go and what to do when it's your first. And
Mhm.
would really love we there was like a centralized source that would walk a woman through, like, here's what you can do to support yourself and not support, I mean, obviously support the baby and support everything that you need for the health of the baby, but really focused on the mom. I think there's varying different resources out there, and it's almost like hard to know which one to go to because there are so many of them.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think yes and no, there are resources, but again, hard to know which ones to actually lean on. I do think that yes, women in general, we are slightly more isolated than we were before. I do think some of that is changing. I think people are understanding the value of like meeting in person and having those conversations with your community. I also think technology has played a really great role because, for women who potentially either have mobility issues, can't get out to go to that mom support group, there are many, many resources out there that offer remote mom support groups. And so you can still see somebody, talk to somebody, have that conversation and connection. Yes, it's not in person, but it's still way better than being by yourself in your own thoughts. You can have that shared experience remotely. The other thing I think is really helpful is that telehealth has gone a wrong way too, right? Like
Mhm.
you can reach out for help before that 6 week postpartum visit and see somebody remotely, and say, hey, I've got all these questions and I have literally no idea what I'm doing here. I need help.
Mhm.
So I think there's pros and cons to all the advancements in technology that we've had, and then like post COVID too.
Definitely interesting to kind of see both sides, but I totally understand that. And then just to close us out here, we've talked about a lot of these different stages and preparing and having your village. Is there anything else? I mean, what are the most important things to be thinking about as a woman as you go through these stages? How do you kind of like prepare for transitions? And then also, um, yeah, I guess just what should women be thinking about, not only as they go through these transitions, but you're aging as well.
I think education is a huge one. I think making sure you have a healthcare provider that you can support, you can get adequate support, and who listens, and hears your experience. And then the other thing I would say is talk talk to your friends, talk to
Mhm.
your family. Let's be more transparent about what
Yeah.
our experiences are. I think when we share information, we learn from each other. I think we've hesitated for a very long time to share some of these more vulnerable experiences. And I think in sharing vulnerability, you derive strength.
Mhm.
And so I would just advocate every woman going through, no matter what life phase they're in, talk about your experience. And, you'll
Agreed.
be surprised with what you learn.
Definitely. And that's why we created our website. It's unisoncommunity.com, an online community forum just for sharing these experiences or asking questions. And it can be as anonymous or as you want or not. But we do think, these conversations are really important because health shouldn't be a secret. And so really appreciate you saying that and being here with us today.
Of course. Of course. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Unison Community Podcast. As a reminder, the information shared in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. This content is not a substitute for professional or medical diagnosis, treatment, or advice. Always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions that you may have regarding your health or medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast or read on the website. Thank you again for being a part of our community, and we hope to hear from you soon.